a YouTuber named Mark Meechan uploaded a clip featuring his girlfriend's pug, a little cute dog, trained to give Nazi salutes when the YouTuber shouted commands such as "Sheik Hail" at this dog. For that, the YouTuber Mark Meechan was convicted, found guilty of hate crime, and awaits sentencing in April. Ricky Gervais and Jewish comedian David Baddiel have spoken in his defence, and it's relevant that David Baddiel is indeed openly identifies as a Jewish comedian. And I'm wondering where the line is between free speech and hate speech, and tell you, obviously, as I usually do, I think this case is a gross affront to freedom of speech. And let me tell you why. I want to make a number of points that I think are incredibly important, because they are points of principle. And when these principles are broken by our judges, it worries me because precedents are set. And the first thing I'll say in the case of Mark Meechan is it's not isolated. Just the week before, our border agency decided to hold somebody under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000 to hold a white, non-Muslim, Canadian, right-wing populist activist named Lauren Southern under our Schedule 7 of our Terrorism Act 2000, a schedule under which the right to silence is a criminal offence. That's how serious this act is. That's the mission creep that's going on here. And they held her for distributing leaflets in Luton that said Allah is gay. In other words, for blasphemy. And now here we have a judge deciding that Mark Meechan and his YouTube video, an unfunny one at that in my personal subjective opinion, was guilty of hate speech and was criminally liable for it. Well, here's the problem I have with it. The importance of free speech is something that I believe is the cornerstone of our democracy. Because without free speech, parties, political parties, campaigners don't have the right to campaign to recruit you to join their various perspectives. Without free speech, you don't have the right to then propagate the perspective of these various political parties. Without free speech, it becomes impossible to hold politicians to account for their views on anything from Brexit and Remain all the way through to the tax and the economy and the NHS. Without free speech, you don't even have the right to practice your religion. In other words, the cornerstone of any secular, liberal, democratic society is free speech. Free speech is probably the most important element of a secular democracy. It's free speech that opens up debate and inquiry. And without free speech, you cannot have free inquiry. And without free inquiry, you cannot have freedom of thought. To clamp down on free speech means thought control, because as I said, without free speech, you cannot have freedom of thought. That's how important this is. It was Galileo and his free speech that allowed him to do what he did when he questioned the unscientific orthodoxy of his day. It was free speech that allowed Darwin to do what he did when he questioned the religious and unscientific orthodoxy of his day. And as a result of their free speech, in other words, their heresy, we are the civilized nations that we're meant to be in this day and age. And so free speech and the right to free speech is the flip side to the right to be heretical. The two cannot be separated. And so, yes, Mark Meechan's YouTube video, otherwise known as Count Dankula on YouTube, yes, it was heretical. Yes, it was unsavory, perhaps even offensive. But guess what? Free speech and defending it doesn't mean anything at all if you only defend it for things that you like. That's not free speech. That's actually defending your own opinion and your right to say your own opinion. Free speech is granting others the right to say things that you may not want to hear. Defending free speech only becomes relevant when you're defending it against things that people find offensive. Otherwise, it's irrelevant to even have a conversation. And that's why I often say that in a free society, you have every right to be offended, but you have zero rights to insist that I do not offend you. Because that's what it means to understand free speech. To argue that free speech only applies when saying what you want to hear isn't an argument for free speech, it's an argument for tyranny. The only time this argument becomes relevant is when defending people you disagree with, not when defending people you agree with. And this moves me to another point. Do you think the Nazis themselves would have tolerated their cherished salute being mocked by a dog? A small, scrawny, cute little pug that has no strength, that defies all of the stereotypes that they wanted to propagate of the strong Aryan man. Do you think in Nazi Germany they would have tolerated this joke? How do you think the Nazis would have reacted to this joke? Well, surprise, surprise. They would have done exactly what this judge in free and enlightened Britain did, and sentence the unfunny comedian to a criminal sentence. It's the Nazis that would say this joke isn't allowed. So why on earth is a secular democratic judge saying this joke isn't allowed? And he said it, by the way, resting on the prosecution's case that argued that the context of the joke is irrelevant. Of course, context in comedy is always relevant. And to say that context in comedy is irrelevant is to misunderstand comedy full stop. Because if context isn't relevant, I can pull up for you any number of given clips from the beautiful, funny and amazing sitcom Allo Allo, where many of the characters are dressed in Nazi salutes, many of them are acting as Nazis, many of them are indeed pretending to be against the British interests, against the French resistance there as well in that sitcom, in that TV comedy. And if I were to strip that of context, find all of those actors guilty for glorifying Nazism and propagating hate speech. Of course context is relevant when it comes to comedy. And why on earth have we, secular liberals, centrists and centre-left, why have we abandoned this debate? Why have we handed this entire debate to populists to hijack for us? Since when did we stop caring about free speech? I'm incredibly worried. Incredibly worried, because I think whether or not you found this joke by Mark Meechan funny or not, and I personally didn't find it funny, but guess what? Comedy's subjective. And what people find humorless and humorful is subjective. What people are offended by or at is subjective. And that's the whole point of it, of free speech. If you didn't find it funny, and I didn't find it funny, then the easiest thing to do, in fact, the only fitting punishment for this attempt at comedy by Mark Meechan, the only fitting punishment, and I can assure you, as any comedian listening to me would well know, that this punishment surely does sting. It really hits them where it hurts. The only fitting punishment for a joke that you don't like is to simply not laugh at it. And there we have it, folks. The Holy Grail for how to deal with offensive jokes. Don't laugh at them.